All right, hot take. The most stable part of this year's South Carolina team and program for the next 3 years might be provided by a brand new true freshman. LockedOn Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into today's episode and to Locked On Gamecocks. It is great to have you along. I am your host, Chris Marler. Before we even start, let me just tell you right now, before anyone says anything in the comments, this is a red and white shirt. I will not address it again. Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. It is Tuesday, August 20th. We are single-digit days away from college football and almost single-digit days away from South Carolina football. But first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Remember, guys, also today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Remember that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket with that $5 bet, as long as it's from YouTube and or YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, listen, we've got a fun episode. First, we are starting off with an interview with a good buddy of mine, Barrett Sallee, formerly of CBS Sports, now with Outkick. So we will start there, and then we will get into some of the topics of the day, which include we have projected starters for the offensive line, and I'm going to tell you why I think Josiah Thompson might be the key to stability, not only for this year's team, but for the program moving forward over the next 3 to 4 years. All right, we are joined by a very special guest, good buddy of mine, Barrett Sallee, who I didn't know this because I'm as unprofessional as can be until like maybe 30 seconds ago. Not only are you working for Outkick, formerly of CBS, and you have been covering college football since, as long as I can remember, do a phenomenal job of it, but also of the College Football Smothered and Covered podcast powered by Locked On. Man, I appreciate you coming on. I know you're about to head out the door to go to Dublin, Ireland for the first weekend of college football. So very jealous of that. But I wanted to catch you before you do and ask you a little bit about the hometown team, obviously, that I cover with South Carolina football from a national perspective and just kind of getting more, I guess, like feedback nationally. This has not been not been a program that has been covered very closely, I feel like, in the national media over the entire offseason, outside of any kind of remote hot seat talk. But what is the current national perception, I feel like, of South Carolina football heading into the 2024 season?
Anonymity. And I know South Carolina fans hate to hear that, but it's anonymity. And I think you go back and look at South Carolina's glory days of at least this generation, maybe last one. It's Lou Holtz, it's Steve Spurrier, right? Like that's what you think of when you think of South Carolina football. It's not Jadeveon Clowney. It's not Stephen Garcia. Well, some people probably think of Stephen Garcia.
Stephen Garcia does.
Stephen Garcia definitely does. But it's an anonymous football program, and I know that sucks because South Carolina fans are so passionate. Maybe the most passionate fans in the sport. And I don't say that just because this is a South Carolina podcast. I truly do believe that. But it's a program that just can't find a way to stay nationally relevant. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way Steve Spurrier left it, how things just sort of ended kind of in a bizarre way. The recruiting kind of tailed off. At the same time, the players in South Carolina, you weren't getting Stephon Gilmore or Lattimore or Jadeveon Clowney, so it's like, okay, what are you now? And South Carolina's sort of been searching for that identity. Hard nosed with Will Muschamp, maybe not. Fun with Shane Beamer, yeah, I think Shane's done a pretty good job, but there's still not any players there. Like the talent they're so devoid of talent compared to the rest of the SEC. It's just kind of hard to build an identity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the interesting things with Beamer because they've got back-to-back top 20 recruiting classes, which is great nationally, but then it's also, I talked about this yesterday on the show with Moscona, which is if you're top 20, and especially if you're 20th, right? Like you're 10th or 11th in the conference. And And that's difficult. I think one of the things that's more impressive that Beamer's been able to do, especially in the portal era, is you don't see him going out and get a ton of guys like you've seen at Ole Miss or like, like outside the SEC, maybe in Miami. But you have seen him go out and get like a marquee guy the past couple of cycles when you got Spencer Rattler coming in at quarterback and then going out and getting Rocket Sanders. I know he's coming off an injury, but I think the roster hopefully will start getting deeper. Going into the season, one of the things I keep honing in on, and we're going to operate from a standpoint of maybe it's wishful thinking or not, Barrett. I don't know. I think this team is going to get to 6 wins somehow, some way. I think it's very possible. And you look at some of the home games they have against teams they have traditionally struggled against. Mizzou, you've lost 5 in a row. A&M has owned you 9 out of the last 10 years. You also get LSU and Ole Miss coming to Williams-Brice, which those aren't natural rivalries by any means, but they are teams that have struggled on the road. Out of those 4 games, what's the best opportunity for Shane Beamer to pull an upset there?
I'm not buying Missouri, man. And I know a lot of other people are. I'm just not buying Missouri.
Yeah.
I think at home late in the season, it's one of those things where people might figure out Brady Cook. People might figure out Luther Burden. The depth on that defensive front for Missouri might have worn down, and we saw them already have some injury bad luck. I just don't trust. I love Eli Drinkwitz. I mean, I love, like we've talked about this at media days. Like, I love the dude. I just can't see that offense being what it was with a running game taking a step back, and defensively injuries have hit the worst part of that unit. Right.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of toss-ups for South Carolina. I think right now, pretty much every team like in that sort of beefy middle of the SEC, you can sort of call a toss-up for South Carolina. But I think if we're talking about which one it'll be Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, you said 6-6. I think 5-7, 2-6 in the SEC. I could that would be, I still think probably worst case or close to worst case scenario, because if you win a lot of your toss-ups, you're probably still going to get to a bowl game. I just think it's hard to trust South. Let's be honest. I don't know what to make of Lenore Sellers. Like, that's just it. Like, people can talk about, like, I know like there's this narrative out there like, oh, Lenore Sellers is going to surprise some people. I'd like to know why. And I don't say that because I don't trust the guy. I just don't know why.
Right.
Like, maybe they're right. I haven't heard a consistent sort of explanation as to why that narrative is out there for some people. And that's fine. Like, I know we have to have takes, but my take is I had no freaking clue.
Well, that was my next question. So thanks a lot, Barrett. No, I think the Missouri thing is so interesting to me. And I did a show on this a while back that, like, I'm with you, man. I think that out of all the potential swing games or like toss-ups, like you said, Missouri makes the most sense to have the upset, because I mean, you obviously know this game and this conference better than almost anybody. Like, you know who Mizzou plays the week before?
Vandy.
Oklahoma.
Oh no, they play Alabama. They play Alabama before.
They get Bama, and then they get a week off, and then Oklahoma. Then they got to come to South Carolina.
That's right.
So it's like I just think that in my mind, it's like, in talking to Mizzou fans, there's just constantly going to be, whether it's fair or not, I think it's unfair, but there's this little brother mentality that they are constantly put in the shadow of people in the SEC because of the geography thing. But then you talk about, like, dude, it's like, if I always say it's like if you change schools, right? And you lost like a bunch of weight, and all of a sudden Missouri is this team that comes back from the summer camp and it's like, hey man, I'm a different person. I'm in a new school. Like, we just went to 11 games, or we won 11 games last year, went to a New Year's Six Bowl, and all of a sudden, like, your old bully from your old school shows up, and now it's like Oklahoma and Texas are now in this conference where you've fought as hard as you can to make a name for yourself. I think they're going to put so much stock into that Oklahoma game that it's a massive potential letdown game against South Carolina the week after.
Well, and by that point, depth will be a problem. And I'm not saying it's going to be a problem, not going to be a problem for South Carolina. It might be, it probably will be. But you're right with Missouri, that chip on their shoulder is big. They're going to be, we talk about anonymity. If they don't win 10 or 11 games, anonymity in the SEC is going to creep in even more than it was before, because you're not going to get past Texas and Oklahoma. And then, at that point, if they haven't had the kind of success that some people are picking, I'm not saying they'll pack it in, but I mean, it's going to be hard to find something to play for if you're sitting there, 6-6, 6-4, 6-5 going into the last couple of games of the season.
Yeah, people tend to forget that Eli Drinkwitz hasn't had a winning season before last year in his first 3. All right, since we don't want to talk about Lador sellers, this is my last question for you, and it's kind of a loaded question, I think, especially in this day and age and the expanded SEC. But when you look at South Carolina trying to find sustained success, and I'm not necessarily saying like the 2011 to 2013 run where you had 3 straight 11-win seasons, but what's it going to take for Shane Beamer to have sustained success in this new SEC moving forward?
Transfer portal king. He's going to have to be Ole Miss. And I think from a personality standpoint, he's like a Diet Kiffin, which is a compliment. He can sell that program. He got Spencer Rattler to come there. He's, like you said, Rocket Sanders went there. Rocket Sanders was a good player at Arkansas. He's going to have to take that Lane Kiffin approach. And I think and it's not just South Carolina fans, it's older fans in general. And I'm not talking about like me being 44, like 50, 60-year-olds. That seems like taboo for some programs, right? It shouldn't be for South Carolina because, South Carolina's not going to get top 8, 9, 10 recruiting classes every year. It's just not going to happen. And like you mentioned, 20 is not good enough, like at all. So if you kind of take the route of Lane Kiffin and just start bringing in transfer after transfer, making it the hip, fun, exciting program in a variety of different ways, which Shane can do, then I think that he can do it. That's how South Carolina is going to have to live. But, South Carolina also is in a situation now where talk about anonymity, it could stay there. And that's the problem. Like, is South Carolina going to become like Arkansas, not like with all the drama, but, a team where, in reality, fans might want more, but 7-5 is a pretty good season. 8-4 is a tremendous season. South Carolina fans might have to recalibrate their expectations, especially if they don't become transfer portal U. I think that's what they have to do. I think Shane understands that. I talked to Shane on my show, Smothered and Covered, like 4 or 5 months ago. He doesn't want to do that. But I think he either does recognize or will soon recognize that that's how he has to live.
Yeah. Recalibrating expectations is something all SEC fans are really good at.
It's not you don't at all want to fire the coach when that happens.
No, never. All right, let me get you out of here on this very quickly. Obviously, FanDuel is one of our good friends and sponsors of this show. You're headed to Ireland. You're headed to Dublin.
I am.
We are both two Georgia boys, from Atlanta and all that kind of stuff. Talk me out of just betting the house on the Jackets plus 11.5 because that line has come down from 14.
I cannot talk you out of that. I will not even attempt to talk you out of that. On my show, I am on board with Georgia Tech making a close game, a fun game. That offense is legit, and it's not just Haynes King. It's Jamal Haynes. It's 4 offensive linemen returning. It is an freshman All-American wide receiver. That team is good. Like, they're good.
Yeah.
They're going to make it close. And teaser, I talked to Brent Key. You'll catch that on College Football Smothered and Covered on Wednesday. So talk to him 101, but I cannot talk you out of that. What I can talk you into is that there will be lots of Guinness consumed by yours truly. Guinness Brewery's 3 blocks away from my hotel. Jameson Distillery is 5 blocks away from my hotel. There are golf courses all over the place. This is a work trip.
Yeah, sure. Some people call it walking distance. You're in stumbling distance of both those places. So
I 100 and the stadium, and I get to do the Sirius XM show there. So it's going to be awesome.
I love it, man. Well, I appreciate you joining us. Have a safe trip. I'll talk to you when you get back, and we'll talk then.
Thanks, dude.
All right, obviously appreciate Barrett coming on, talking a little bit about big picture stuff and more of a 30,000 foot, more a kind of angle and approach and perception nationally of what South Carolina is. I want to talk to you also about another friend of ours, and that's our friends at Ibotta. Before we continue on the show, guys, are y'all taking that dream vacation this summer but dreading the cost? Are you maybe going down to Florida at some point and participating in an Airbnb type situation or anything like that, like I'm doing? If you are, make sure you're using Ibotta. With Ibotta, you get cash back on all your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories and buying hats that are red and garnet and black this summer and spend less time just dreaming about them. Here's the thing, y'all. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries, beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Now, remember, I just said cash back. It's not just like points or anything like that. It is actual cash back. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or that fancy dinner you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw directly to your bank account or PayPal or gift cards, you name it. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipts, and voila, the money is yours. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying out the app by using the code LockedOnCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store or wherever you get your apps, download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use the code LockedOnCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LockedOnCollege. All right, guys, when we come back, we are going to discuss why I think a true freshman might be the key to stability, not only for this year's season and this year's team, but also the program moving forward over the next 3 to 4 years. Locked On College returns right after this. All right, guys, welcome back in, and I appreciate you guys joining us along for a fun episode. Here it is Tuesday, August 20th. I'm so freaking pumped how close we are to the actual football season. Real quick, like I said over and over and over again, I really appreciate you guys making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Remember, guys, for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football podcast. And don't forget that today, college football is obviously back. The Locked On College Football podcast kicks off tonight, actually, at 7 p.m. with a live season preview. That's right. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, August 20th, tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Locked On College, the 24/7 streaming YouTube channel. We are live with a preseason series preview. It's a 4-part series that covers each of the 4 major conferences with discussion on which ACC, Big 10, Big 12, and SEC teams have a shot at the expanded college football playoffs. Super excited. I did this last week with the SEC guys, went on there, talked about South Carolina's chances in the SEC this year, talked a little trash of some other teams. Make sure you stick around for that. But be sure to check out the special streaming on Locked On College's 24/7 YouTube channel or on Amazon Fire TV, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so we're talking a little bit about the offensive line, and I know we've been going through some of the position unit breakdowns, and this is one that I have intentionally waited on discussing because of the fact that when you look at this position in general, this position unit in general, and all of college football, not just in South Carolina, it is one of the more almost ever-changing like position groups you see across the board in college football. And part of that's because of the nature of what you're doing, right? Like it is the easiest, I feel like, to get injuries. You are in contact with other huge bodies on every single possible play. And I told you guys yesterday, and I brought this up, I think, on the weekend show as well, where Shane Beamer has brought up the fact that, like, listen, today, Tuesday at 8 a.m., the whole plan today at 8 a.m. was to talk to a few of the guys, talk to the guys on the roster that were most likely going to be as a part of scout team to start the year. Doesn't mean that's how they're going to be the whole year, but to start the year, that's where they're going to be. This program has shown multiple times over the past couple of years that, like, guys who have started on scout team have ended up becoming starters. Like that is not something that is new to Shane Beamer. And it's one of the things I love most about him is because when you go to play scout team, a lot of times you see that at bigger schools, it's like you don't have the option to over recruit somebody or gray shirt anybody. A lot of times those scout team guys are, they are in that for the long haul for a whole year where it's like, yeah, you are a tackling dummy. You are just a body to get us ready for whoever we're playing. That is not the case in South Carolina. And it is you've heard Beamer talk about this specifically with their practices and how they're run. It's they're probably doing like 15 minutes total of practice time out of usually what's like 2+ hours with scout team. So this is not some place where it's like you are going and your chances of playing go to die because you're on scout team. But nonetheless, that is when today is when they decided they were going to probably start designating some guys for assignment, for lack of better words, on that. Now, going back to the offensive line, the thing that is unique about offensive line, like I said, like I've brought this up over and over and over again. Our buddy Cole Kublik is a huge proponent of this. And that is, it doesn't mean you have the most talented 5 guys. It doesn't mean you have the highest ranked recruits, like 5 highest ranked recruits across the board, left to right, the 5 biggest bodies, whatever. It's the right combination and the right 5 that mesh together, that work together well, that block together well, and all those things. That's what makes an elite offensive line group. Now, this is an offensive line that we have talked about time and time again that struggled immensely a season ago. Gave up 41 sacks, I believe, ranked, well beyond like in the 100s nationally. But it's also an offensive line that, and people outside of your own program never seem to bring this kind of crap up, and it pisses me off. But like, it's an offensive line that seems like they lost somebody once a week. You know what I mean? Like it's like decimated with injuries and plagued. Plagued is probably the better way to put it, right? Casey Henry is a guy that might be a starter this year. Spoiler alert, at right tackle that was out for a majority of last year because of injury. And the fact that you're able to get guys back, and it's not just 5, which is, I think, like that may sound stupid to people because obviously you have to have depth. But you hear Shane Beamer talk about it. Like he keeps bringing it up. He's like, man, we got about 8 guys right now. It started out, I think, before fall camp, we thought about there might be 9. You get an injury, obviously, to Marky Anderson. But you talk about like having 8 guys that can compete for starting jobs now. And then we talk about the versatility that you have to have all across the board, right? And having guys be able to be trying to play multiple positions. You got a guy like, Torricelli Simpkins, which I believe I said that name right. And if I did, pat on the back, guys. We are trending in the right direction with the names. But that's a guy that can play in any of the interior line positions, guard to guard, center guard. You love that. And you're going to need that at some point because I can't think of a single time where I've seen 5 offensive linemen start a season and end a season without any sort of injuries at all, right? But I think that when you have 8 guys that can provide you depth across the board, that is something that South Carolina has lacked over the past couple of seasons, and it showed. And the word even that Beamer uses is solid 8. We wish he had more. We got about a solid 8 dudes that I think are going to be capable of starting. And I've teased this before, and we'll finally get into it. I'll tell you, these are the projected starters we have that are listed as of today. Okay. And I'll go from right tackle to left tackle. Or actually, I'll go from left tackle to right tackle because it makes more sense. Left tackle, Josiah Thompson, is being projected as the starting tackle at left tackle. I don't think it's a huge shock, but we'll get into him shortly, right? Then you talk about at left guard, you have Kamar Bell. At center, you're going to have Vershawn Lee. Then at right guard, Torricelli Simpkins. Torricelli Simpkins is also listed on the 2 deep as the potential backup center as well. So that's what I'm talking about, versatility and being able to provide depth at a number of places. Make yourself more valuable on this roster and to this team and provide depth with those guys who are the best 5, right? And then you have right tackle. You have Casey Henry. Now, let me tell you what I love most about this specific unit before I get to left tackle. The guard to guard, interior offensive line. You got depth there, probably the most depth, and you also have the most veteran experience there. Not a single guy in those 3 across from guard to guard that I listed that are young, unproven, or don't have a decent amount of some sort of college experience. Those are grown-ass men, right? Like not a single one of them is from after the 2021 recruiting class. Grown-ass men. And that is huge in this day and age of college football. We've talked about it before. Like having valuable experience and age. I don't care how that even sounds. It's like, listen, just because you're 25 or 26 doesn't mean, or 22 and up, doesn't mean necessarily better than a guy like Josiah Thompson. Tell you what it does mean. Physically, you're more developed, just regardless. Physically, you're more developed, right? And I love that. And then you want to talk about the tackle positions. That's where you have the most youth there, right? You have the most youth there. But you talk about Case and Henry, a guy that would have started a year ago and did, but he started the season at right tackle as a freshman, but he got hurt. Kid out of Walton, Georgia. Now, I'm from Atlanta. I've lived there for most of my life until, I've lived back and forth in Columbia and Lexington over the last several years. That's where my family is. But growing up in Atlanta, Walton is a premier high school football program in the state. And the state of Georgia is right up there with Texas and Florida and California. It's above California, in my opinion. You've got another kid on this offensive line from Moultrie, Georgia. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, Moultrie, Georgia. That's Colquitt County. It's where Rush Propst was for a minute. Kamar Bell, kid that signed with Auburn out of high school. That's elite competition you're at least playing against and playing with since you're 15, 16, 17 years old. I love that pedigree and that background. Now I want to get to the main part, and that is Josiah Thompson. And I think, excuse me, guys, this Airbnb is outrageous. Josiah Thompson has a potential to be a rock. And I don't mean just for this offensive line. I mean for this school. I mean for this unit, this team, and this program. It is not often that you can get a guy that can come in and be a day one starter as a highly ranked recruit, right? Like this guy is he's a composite high 4-star, top 50 overall type player. I think 247 had him ranked on 37th, number 2 tackle in the country. 6'7", 300 pounds. He has come in. And I tell you what, he's from Dillon. He's in-state from South Carolina. It's a must get that you went out and got. And now a kid that was wanted by everyone in the country could be a day one starter and be a day one starter for the next 3 years. And a guy, when I tell you, man, and you look at the question marks you have had on this offensive line over the past couple of years, the ease and the relief you have as a head coach to be able to go fill out, I mean, it's not baseball, but you can fill out a lineup card, for lack of better words, and you can just pencil in, Thompson's going to be there at left tackle. We're good. I don't know what else we got there. We got some competition here. Might have a couple guys banged up in the interior. Well, I'll tell you what, we got Josiah Thompson at left tackle, and we're going to have him for 3 years. It's so him being a corner piece and a cornerstone of what Beamer is trying to build is massive for this program. And I've said this before, the recruiting stuff in the state of South Carolina, Barrett Sallee said it a little bit earlier, alluded to it earlier. South Carolina is not a bumper crop for high school recruits. But when you see them, and there's certain guys that do come out that are highly ranked in your state, even though it is rare, you got to go out and get those guys. You've seen time and time again that Clemson does not really give a blank about in-state recruiting as much. There's also not a program that considers themselves elite, right? Which Clemson fans, of course, do. And I would probably have to agree, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, they would be in that consideration. Their lack of recruiting and development at the offensive line position is atrocious. Don't have a guy that's been drafted higher than the second round since Dabo's been the head coach. I think you've only had like 5 total before going into last season or year before, and almost every single one of them was the 5th round or later. They just it's not a focus for them. Massive get for South Carolina. This is way down the line, but again, you're talking about building a cornerstone and implementing like this type of mentality moving forward. We own this state. You work from the inside out. Josiah Thompson. Massive deal. And I think it's a massive deal. It's a great testament to him, for one, coming in and competing right away, because it wasn't just given to him. And maybe he doesn't win it on day one. I don't know. I think he will. I think it makes sense for him to go out there for game one against ODU and man that position. But here's the thing. Working from the inside out, going and getting in-state kids, recruiting them. This is a very far ways away, but they came out with the top 100 players for the 2027 class. So rising sophomores. I'm exhausted just talking about it and thinking about recruiting kids that are about to be 15 and 16 years old. But this is what guys like Shane Beamer and guys like Darren Usher and have to like go into a season and constantly be top of mind about, and building a roster, building a program and roster management, all those things. You've got two guys in that 2027 class that are currently in the initial rankings, ranked not only in the top 100, but top 30 in the country. You've got to put a fence around the state. And when you do get a chance to get elite in-state talent, you have to go out and get it. And I love the fact that Josiah Thompson is a guy that's going to be suiting up in garnet and black this year. It's huge for this program. And if he can become a cornerstone piece and one of the most consistent pieces like that you have like on this roster, massive deal for Shane Beamer and company, not just this season, but for the next 3 years as well, when he should be the starter until hopefully he goes pro. I just, I cannot speak enough about how big of a deal that is. So that is all for this portion of the show. We're going to close out with a little bit of a fun topic. I was talking to, I would say, an astute scholar earlier on Twitter today named Gamecock Troll. And despite the name, he actually brought up a very good point, something I want to get into, something I thought about before, but I want to get into again before we close out the show. Now, like I said, appreciate you guys joining us. Make sure you stick around. We will close out the show shortly. Before we do, I want to talk to you one more time about our good friends at FanDuel. Listen, guys, here's the deal. FanDuel, they are running a really, really cool promotion as of right now. Like, all you have to do, right? Like, you've heard me talk about FanDuel before. I am going to go put some money on Georgia Tech in opening weekend, maybe SMU as well, because we got some Power 4 teams that will be in action in week 0. But you've heard us talk about FanDuel before. It's America's #1 sportsbook, but we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. And that is this. All FanDuel customers now through September 22nd can bet $5. And with just $5, you can get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, right, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com and use the visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today. All right, guys, that is all for segment 2. We'll be right back and close the show with a fun segment talking about the 2012 South Carolina team and realistically how close they came to winning a national championship. All right, so we're going to close out today's show with a look back at, not to be down, and it's not really relevant to this year's team, and I don't really care because it's just something I'm a college football nerd, and I love looking back at this stuff. There's a thing that's been going around. It's a Manti Te'o video and quote where he was talking about the 2012 Alabama team against them, and it went viral this weekend for whatever reason. He was talking about how he hasn't Googled himself for obvious reasons in the last, 10 years. And, of course, it when he put this out, he was talking about how big of a team Bama was and how scared Notre Dame was, because Notre Dame was the #1 team in the country that year going into the national championship. They were undefeated, all that kind of stuff. It got me thinking, this is something I brought up before, because Georgia fans, of course, love to make everything about themselves. And that year, they came very close to winning the SEC championship game. And then I think that they're right in their assumption and saying, yeah, if they would have beaten Alabama in the SEC championship, then they probably would have won the national championship because they would have beaten Notre Dame. That year, if you remember it, I maintain this, okay? There were probably 6 teams in the SEC that year that would have beaten Notre Dame, and South Carolina is one of them. But there were probably 6 teams that could have beaten Notre Dame and won a national championship if they were put in that game. LSU, Florida, if you remember, was like a top 10 team, top 5 team going into the Georgia game, which they lost, but I think that was their only loss of the regular season, like 11-1. LSU, Florida, like I said, South Carolina, which we'll get to, Bama, obviously, Georgia, like we mentioned, and then I think the team that was the best team in the country at the end of that season, which was Texas A&M. Texas A&M had 2 early losses. I think they lost in week 1 at home to Florida, and they lost some other game. I think it was LSU maybe. Later in the year with Johnny Manziel, I think he had like 3 picks. He played horrible, right? But once November started, you saw what he did in Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. And then I don't know if y'all remember he goes on this crazy run to win the Heisman, and they go play Oklahoma, and I think it was the Cotton Bowl. He had like over 510 or 540 yards of offense. They put up over 40 points against a good Oklahoma team. I maintain to this day, I think Texas A&M was the best team in the country at the end of that season. They just didn't get a chance to play for the national title because they lost 2 games. Another team that did not get a chance to play for a national title, but absolutely would have won it, especially against Notre Dame, was South Carolina. People forget how good that team was. You talk about the 11 through 13 seasons, and it's so funny to me because it gets lost in the mix constantly about and again, because Georgia, I think now, especially as Georgia has become what they've become, but you talk about the sliding doors that could have happened that season. If Georgia does win that game, right? If Georgia does win that game and wins a national title, that would have been for the first time in 32 years, because it was 2012. You have to think that Mark Richt probably keeps his job for a few more years. You could make the case that Kirby might end up at South Carolina. What would that have looked like? That's a whole different rabbit hole. But man, that South Carolina team in 2012, for whatever reason, people love to forget about it, right? And focus on those 2 teams, Georgia and Bama, because of the game they played in Atlanta at the SEC Championship game. Let's keep in mind here, guys. You're talking about South Carolina team that went to the SEC Championship game and played in that building 2 years prior, won 11 games the year before, won 11 games this year, and started out the season top 10, never dropped below 17. They lost 2 games in a row to LSU and Florida. Got boat raced by Florida, right? Lost by 2 to LSU. Both those teams were ranked in the top 10. You had 2 losses all season, both the top 10 teams. I think one of them was away from home as well. I'm sorry. They were both away from home. That's right. It bums me out looking at it now because you talk about how just fun and talented that team was. You had Connor Shaw and Dylan Thompson at quarterback. You still had Lattimore at running back for most of the year before the horrific injury. Like Ace Sanders in the return game. Obviously, Clowney. It wasn't even just Clowney too, because Clowney had 13.5 sacks. You led the SEC in sacks that year against some defenses that were really good. Like that Bama defense was number 1 in the country. Georgia put 9 of their starting 11 in the NFL, and South Carolina was the one that led the SEC in sacks that year. My all-time favorite South Carolina player, I don't care how this sounds, DJ Swearinger. He would never have been able to play in this day and age of college football. And it's only been 10 years or 12 years. The play against Clemson is still a top 5 moment for me in the SEC over the last 15 years. I effing love DJ Swearinger so much. But I mean, it goes to show you how difficult it is to win a national championship. It's one of the reasons why expectations are so key in this day and age of football, and they're also so lost. But it's so difficult to win a national championship. It also goes to show you that lost in the shuffle of the Johnny Manziel era, the weird, successful Will Muschamp here at Florida, that crazy, talented Georgia team that almost beat Bama, and then Bama, of course, winning 3 out of 4 national titles, and this being their 3rd. I mean, dude, you can make the case. This is what Gamecock Troll said earlier today. If they wouldn't have lost to LSU, you could just take the Florida tape and throw it out. Like, you lost 44-11, whatever. If you beat LSU, you lose that game by 2 points, and you still get to Atlanta. Let's not forget that this team started out 6-0 and boat raced Georgia 35-7. 35-7. I will never forget it because I was at a bar in Atlanta watching the game, cracking up in a sea of Georgia fans. And I remember I looked up at the last second because I was very happy that Georgia was down by 28 points. Some drunk, obnoxious Georgia a-hole fired like a full PBR right at my head, and I ducked, thank God. Typical Georgia fans. But that was such a good South Carolina team, top to bottom. I mean, got up to number 3 in the country on that trip, a night game at LSU. Just a really, really good team that came very, very close. So if we're going to talk about, Georgia could have won a national championship in 2012, and like me saying A&M could, let's also not forget that South Carolina was knocking on the door of winning a national title that year too, not just because Notre Dame was overrated and trash, but because that was a very good national championship caliber program or team that year as well. All right, that's a look down memory lane. I appreciate you guys joining us. Kind of a longer show. It's the second one we've recorded in 12 hours. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We're going to have to start, or we're going to hope to start getting more interviews, stuff like that. If you guys have suggestions of other people you guys want me to bring on and whatnot, talk to Steven Garcia. We should have him on in the next couple of weeks. And some other guys as well around Gamecock Media. But if you guys have suggestions, let me know. I believe that is it. Before we go, I want to say thank you again for listening to Locked On Gamecocks. But remember, make your first listen Locked On Gamecocks your second listen Locked On College Football. And Spencer McLaughlin does a phenomenal job getting you guys ready for the season, talking about NIL stuff, ever-changing landscape of college football with expanded playoffs and the portal era and all that good stuff. Make sure you are checking out Locked On College Football as well. Make sure you check out Locked On SEC with our buddy Chris Gordy. And also the new one that I just learned about today, College Football Smothered and Covered with Barrett Sallee, powered by Locked On. I appreciate all of you. Y'all have a phenomenal rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Talk to y'all soon.